All right, we're back. Unfortunately, YouTube is down, so I can't record this on YouTube. But what I'll do is I'll put it up later as a video separately. All right, so we are COMP397, and it is in the fall 2017 semester, and we are week 2, part 1 of our broadcast, and we're talking more about Create.js and everything. But before we get into this, what I'd like to do is show you a PowerPoint, which is similar to what these guys saw already. Sorry, guys, but you're going to see it again. Because next week in our series is, I'm just going to go on Centennial for a second. And this is the show must go on scenario, right? Next week in our series, we're going to have, so I just want to make sure that it's not there. Yeah, it's here. I'm going to say COMP305. Yep, of course it is. We're going to have a pitch. You're going to do a pitch, and you're also going to talk about your GDD, right? And if you look at the stuff we talked about last week, and again, we're going, Wallace and I have kind of made both this course, COMP397, and COMP305, a project-based learning course, right? So that way it makes it more interesting. But if you look at the overview for what we're doing next week, again, similar to what we did with the other course, week 3 is your game pitch and game design document, right? So I need to tell you what that is before we actually do it. So let's try and talk about game pitches a little bit right now. So really, people don't know what their game is about. That's kind of an issue. Like, what is your game about? What kind of game are you making? And by the way, this PowerPoint was not mine. It was actually made by a group of students at UIT. But I thought it was pretty good, and I think it kind of captures the stuff that I want to talk to you about anyway, and I'll probably add my own stuff. So what they talk about is really this, they call it the MDA, right? Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics. But I like talking about it as the DNA of your game, which is really what your game is all about, right? So what are the rules of the game, how the players use the rules, and, you know, the experiences your players have in the game. That would be your aesthetics, right? So again, in this case, we're looking at Pac-Man. So let's think that Pac-Man's mechanics are moving, collecting pellets, and eating ghosts, and the dynamics are maneuvering around ghosts, finding safe paths, that kind of stuff. The aesthetics are, you know, you've got a bit of a challenge. There's, you know, you feel like, you know, Pac-Man's got a lot of power. There's anticipation, all that kind of stuff. And we can also say, from an aesthetics perspective, that it's more of a retro style game, you know, of course, because that's the, you know, Pac-Man, the original Pac-Man, right? So there's a couple of other examples. So here we got Street Fighter, right? This example makes me laugh because whenever I look at Street Fighter, I'm always like, whoa, what mechanics are, what the heck? Mechanics are the rules of the game, right? So move, crouch, jump, punch, kick, block. These are all the things they can do. But then the dynamics might be how to use those mechanics to kind of have strategies to beat the other player. And then aesthetics are like, you know, the challenge. Maybe there's a competition. There's combo satisfaction, you know, especially with Mortal Kombat, which is kind of an offshoot of Street Fighter, right? Street Fighter came first, then Mortal Kombat came afterwards. Mortal Kombat was like, you know, finish him, right? Those kind of things, right? That was a kind of a neat concept, you know, to kind of say that, because when it first came out in the arcade, we were all laughing, right? Oh my God, what, you know, we saw like the guy pull out the guy's spine, and we're like, woohoo, blood, death, you know, and that was a big thing back then. Of course, it didn't become so big afterwards because now everyone does that kind of stuff. But back then it was a big thing. And then we have some other ones, but you can see where your game fits in if it's a puzzle game, you know, for mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. So think about when you talk about your pitch next week, what is your DNA? Not your MDA. What is your DNA for your game, right? And then what are you going to be talking about? Every game has things we can talk about depending on the type of game. Your mechanics, your user interface, you know, your art, your video. You want to talk about these things. You want to kind of talk about sound and music. If you're gonna go there, if it's a music or sound-based game, that's what you want to talk about. That's the mechanic. If your game is more of a narrative, you're going to talk story, and then maybe talk about your level design. So there's some examples of games that these guys came up with, right? That maybe have different mechanics involved, right? Different user interface. There's your user interface here, right? Different visuals, right? You can see that they've come up with some games that I'm more of a first-person perspective kind of game, right? Player, but you can certainly come up with stuff. Here's a puzzle game, Portal. I was talking about this. I just started playing this again with my little guy because he's like, let's play a puzzle game, Dad, on the Xbox. I'm like, sure, let's play it, right? So, and you can see that every one of these games has different mechanics, a different user interface. Some of them are diegetic user interfaces that make them look like you're in the game, you're immersed in the game. Other times it's user interfaces that look very non-diegetic, so you can actually look at it and go, I see how this is going. I see that this is something that the player wouldn't see, the actual player that's immersed in the thing, but we can see it. And then think about when we do this idea of elevator pitches, all right? Whenever you think about the PowerPoint presentation you're going to put on next week's PowerPoint presentation, I don't want to see walls of text, right? Walls of text is bad, right? Because this is a visual medium. So what we'd rather see is images, right? I want to see images. This is not a business presentation you're putting on next week. I want it organized, but it's got to be something that, and for people, this is, by the way, for people who've done it with me before, please forgive me. You've probably heard this speech before. If you haven't heard this thing, then it's, I want to kind of put everyone in the same playing field. But you're going to present your game next week, right? But there's no game yet, right? And so you're pitching your concept. And so think about an elevator speech as something where you only have 30 seconds to really tell me the DNA of your game. What is your game about, right? My game is like Mario with grappling hooks, right? As an example, right? Right there, I know it's a kind of, if I know Mario, I know it's kind of a platformer. Maybe it's kind of a retro game. It's using the grappling hook mechanic, right, with similar aesthetic, right? If that makes any sense. So you want to kind of trim the fat out of your presentation. So you don't want your presentation to be full of fat words everywhere. I'd rather have your presentation be full of images that make sense for you. So you want to develop this idea of the one-liner, so you're explaining your game in like one line, if you can, right? Or a log line in a world that like they do in a movie trailer, right? And a world without light, there can a man who, like that kind of stuff, right? That kind of idea, making a log line for a game or a log line for your trailer is the kind of stuff that we want to put in for your game, right? Like, what is your game about? The log line in a world that, like for the trailers, really talk about what the movie's about without actually seeing the movie yet, right? So this is the kind of stuff I want you to kind of generate. So here's an example of a couple of, this might be a player versus player game as an example, player versus computer, different kinds. There's a team kind of aesthetic here. So you talk about what are the players, what are the objectives, what are the rules, what's the theme, what's the style, and you try and wrap that all into your 1 or 2 sentences. Okay, that's what you want to try and wrap into, right? Here's some other one, like maybe, for example, if it's a strategy type game, maybe it's a capture and destroy game. Maybe you want to bring in some territorial control. You want to talk about that. You want to talk about the main mechanic, dynamic, and aesthetic when you build up your log line, right? Some more. I want to get to this one. So here's an example of one that they made. A rail shooter where players must snap pictures of the Pokemon they pass to be graded for quality at the end of each level. Pokemon Snap, right, as an example, would be that kind of game. So think about what your one-liner is going to be for your game. What is it? How can you kind of describe your game in 1 or 2 lines that is exciting for people to hear, right? You want to hear about that. It's not going to bore the crap out of them, right? And it's like straight and to the point. And if you talk to somebody else, if you're selling your game to somebody, it's not going to be something that they're going to be bored about. They might get excited about it. All right, here's one. Metroid Prime, a first-person shooter heavily weighted on exploration and item collection, following a bounty hunter who must track down an alien threat on a mysterious planet. So you got, theme, setting. You understand what kind of game it's going to be. First-person shooter type game. What they're doing. It's not basically about points necessarily. It's kind of neat, right? The way they've done that. But what about this idea of, well, I don't have anything yet. I got nothing, right? This was something that they brought up when they were presenting it to me, but I got nothing, right? And I love this part, which is, well, I don't have any screenshots right now, and I don't have the mechanic all down, and I don't have any code because they're just pitching the game. Right. So what I want you to talk about with your pitch is the idea of, here's my influences. This is what the game is like. Definitely present your title screen with your game, and we'll talk about the details. I've already kind of posted some of the details up on eCentennial with that presentation document that I've already got up there, and I'll refer to that in a second. But I got nothing, right? So what you want to do is kind of give your influences and show games that are similar to the kind of game that you're making, right? And then talk about your DNA, your mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics that you're going to put in the game. The other thing you really want to focus on is scope. The idea that you don't want to make the scope completely out of whack. Like, for example, a game that has Bloom, it's a role-playing game that has mini games all throughout it and side quests. There's no way you're going to do that in this semester, especially with a web game. You guys are way disadvantaged compared to the Unity guys, right? Because you're scripting everything from scratch, right? That's just the way it is. So, but also on this side, it's pretty simple, right? Like a little game that might be too simple for what you're doing, right? That's why I've given you your constraints, so you can kind of, match. Everyone else with the stuff that you're building. Now this is interesting. The thing is, you and the game programming 1 class are using the same requirements to build your game out. You've got no advantages compared to them, even though they're using Unity, right? So the only thing that you're going to have that's different than them is the build is going to be a little quicker than they are. There's no drag and drop from your perspective. But from their perspective, they have the ability to create a prototype very quickly. So what you can build compared to what they can build might be slightly different. So you need to think about, just to recap, and this is what they kind of brought in here. The review mark, the pitch itself, right? There's 5% next week, right? Think about what you're doing. You're pitching your game, right? That's one part of the mark. The other part of the mark is the idea that, so you're going to do a presentation, and that means out of your team, maybe you have a team of 5 people or 3 people or whatever it's going to be, at least 2 people I want to present next week. So that means like I have a team of 4, 2 people are presenting, maybe 1 person's controlling the PowerPoint presentation, and that's it, okay? Not everyone has to stand up here with their hands in their pockets. I don't want to see that. That's negative, right? If you're going to be up here, like we've talked about before, you need to present, you need to talk, right? So pick people who are, who want to do that. If you don't, none of your people know how to do that. It's a good employability skill, essential employability skill to kind of master, which is presenting to more people, not worrying about what you're saying so much, but being confident in your abilities and doing what you have to do. All right, so that's how the presentation is going to be. Normally, it should be around 10 minutes with a demo. You have no demo next week. There's no game demo. All you're doing is presenting your pitch, so it's 5 to 7 minutes. That's what I'm looking for next week on Saturday. So 1 o'clock, we're going to start with that. I will pick groups at random, so all you guys have to be like ready to present next week. Okay. Make sure it's clear. Talk about the mechanics. Talk about the DNA. Give some examples. Things that have influenced you before. Think about how to cut the fat out of your presentation. I don't want walls of text. Okay, it's going to be a visual presentation. Look at your one-liner. How can you give yourself a one-liner for your game, right? And make sure it's interesting. Remember, this is not a business presentation. For more details, let's take a look at that final project overview that I was looking at. So remember, it's due next week, week 3. I'm going to put up the assignment details later on today. But let's take a look at that first part. The first part, the pitch itself, is 5% of your final grade. So there's 3 parts to it. Your presentation, your actual presentation ability, you to present, being clear with the class. The document, the presentation document, that's the second part. And the third part is your game design document. Those are the 3 things you have to have ready to do for next week. 2 of them are going to be due at midnight. Your game design document and your presentation document, the final versions of those for the first draft, are going to be due by midnight next week on Saturday. All right. The other thing, the presentation itself, so your delivery of the presentation is the other third, right? So there's 3 parts. What does your presentation physically have to have in it at minimum? You must have a title slide, all right? That basically has your team logo ready to go and your team name, okay? Team logo, again, you don't go too crazy, but whoever your art prime is on your team should be the one that's probably going to be the one that's handling it, okay? You can always collaborate and think about a nice team logo. Don't go too crazy. Even if it changes later on, it's okay. Right now, I'm looking for something that represents you and a good team name, okay? You might as well put on the name of the game, too. You must have some kind of working title for the game. So please don't leave working title as the name of the game, okay? That's not acceptable. One or more slides around the planning process. So what's your inspiration, that kind of stuff. Where did you get your idea from? Okay. A game overview. So give me that one-liner right here. Give me that one-liner. What's your DNA, right? Your mechanics, your dynamics, your aesthetics. What are those things, right? Talk about the dynamic in more detail in your game definition. Talk about, how this thing works. Okay, I'm a Mario game, with grappling hook, right? That's what it is. Here's how it's going to work. Draw it out. Draw out your level. Talk about your first level. Describe a typical level, what it looks like when you play this game, right? Do a wireframe from the side. So what if you're making a platformer, what is a typical level will look like, okay? And I don't want a lot of details, no colors. All I want is black and white lines with labels that point to this is my player, this is my enemy, here's my platform, these are the bullets, this is the grappling hook, this is how it will work. Draw an arrow, like very basic, even with paint, I don't care. Just to get an idea of how this game would look, all right? Talk about the roles. So there should be a slide with everyone's picture. Whoever's in your team, I want pictures with the role underneath. Like, for example, Eddie, chief engineer, whatever. And then, we might have somebody else, Max, captain of the Starship Enterprise, whatever it's going to be, right? But all the roles, whatever they are, have got to be put in there, right? Now, obviously, it's not going to be captain of the Enterprise. It'll be producer, engineer, like the roles I talked about earlier, right? And those are primes. Doesn't mean that, okay, because I'm the developer, the lead developer or software engineer, I'm not going to touch art, or I'm not going to be involved with planning. Of course you are, right? These are just the main roles for you, right? And your preparation. What is involved? What are you doing? What are your plans? When do you meet for your team? When are you gonna? What's your plan to get your first playable out? Talk to me about a little bit. Put that in the slide in terms of what your progression is going to look like. What can we expect from you next week, the next time you present? Okay. So this part here is all the stuff that's part of your pitch document. Late. Hi. Right. So this is your pitch document right here, right? This is your presentation you're going to put together. And this part here is your game design document, right? And let's take a look at that. Now, for people who've had me before, if you've had Game Programming 1 with me, or if you've had Wallace for Intro to Game and Simulation, then you should already know what this external document looks like. But let's go over it one more time for you, just in case you've never seen it before somehow, right? Some of you may have not seen it before if you're a software engineering student. So it kind of looks like this. This is a template. And when I say template, I mean it's a template. I want you to change it heavily. All right? I don't want you to keep it this way. It's the name of the company. Your team name goes up here. Please insert your logo somewhere up here. Anything that has square brackets means replace, right? Or remove, right? So put in the title of your game here. If you need a second title, you can do that down here as like a subtitle, if you will. The version of your document would be 1. The year obviously is not 2012, it's 2017, and whatever the name of your company is, and all of your names should go right here. People that are part of the team, right? Your group names. Again, the date that this document was produced, right? Which should change every page. Table of content with that is hyperlinked. I want this part. So it's hyperlinked so I can click onto it and go to the next part especially if you convert this document to a PDF. And again, I will accept either a PDF or a Word document, not open document format. Please do not give me that, right? Or any other kind of format. Word or PDF only is the only thing that I will accept. Okay? Version history. Here, I want at least a link to your GitHub repo, whoever's in charge of that GitHub repo, as well as maybe a snapshot of your current commits, if any. You may not have any by next week. Okay, just being honest, right? But a link to your GitHub repo is okay. Okay, this part. This is instructions. I want you to get rid of this. Don't leave this here. If I see this is the body of your video game design document, I'm going to kill you guys, right? Get rid of it, right? Game overview. Again, this is, you could use some of the stuff. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to do your game pitch presentation first. Maybe what you want to do is focus on your game design document first. Get this done. Highlight it. You know, kind of describe more about what your game is like before you do your pitch presentation document, right? So some of the same stuff I've already talked about would go in here, right? Like, what's your game overview? Give me that one-liner. Describe your game in more detail. Here, you can go into detail as much as you want, all right? If you want to write a page about your game, go ahead. Don't put that page of your game description inside your PowerPoint. I want visual language there, all right? But here, it's okay. You can put details. Your gameplay mechanics, you want to put that in there. How does your game play? And your dynamics and your aesthetics. All that stuff can go in there. Camera, I mean, for now, because we're doing a 2D game with web game programming, that's what we're doing here. Camera, you can remove this whole section, or just put 2D, orthographic. That's up to you. Controls, how does your game work? Are you using a gamepad? Are you using mouse and keyboard? Is it keyboard only? How does your game work? Saving and loading, you're not going to have in there, so please remove this section, because you're not going to save and load a game unless you want to really, this will take a long time to perfect properly. I don't expect that your game will have access to some kind of back-end database or anything like that, but if you do, then you can implement this. This is not required. Interface sketch would be some place where you put your wireframe. Okay, so give me a wireframe of your level. Show me what your interface looks like. You can sketch it out for now. You have no interface. There is no level. Sketch it out. Show me what your interface looks like. Where's your score going to go? Where's your, what does it look like when you start the game? Your start screen, your play screen, your end screen. What does it look like? Draw them out. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can't do this section yet because this is where you actually do screenshots, right? Because you don't have any screenshots yet. Okay. Your game world, you can describe this if this is applicable to you. Like if you're making a top-down, tank game, you may want to describe this a little bit more detail. If you're doing a side scroller, you can just say it's a side scroller. It could be in a cave environment, whatever the game looks like, the game world you can describe here. Levels, and again, in detail, you can describe each of your levels. So you can say, here's my tutorial level, here's what my first level is going to look like, here's what my second level is going to look like, or my last level. And again, all I'm looking for at this point is sketches. Okay, I don't need more detail than that. Okay. Game progression, how does the character level up? How do they, what items can they pick up? How can they advance in the game? What's the goal of each level? All that kind of stuff is related, right? What kind of characters do you have? Do you have a player? That kind of stuff. Are there non-player characters? Is it just a plane, like an avatar of some kind, and there is no non-player characters? What do the enemies look like? Talk about them, right? If you're playing player versus player, is it the other player? Are they the enemy? So talk about that a little bit. Weapons. Even though I say weapons here, there does not need to be weapons in the game. I never said you have to shoot and kill in any one of the versions of the game. You can make it a not that kind of game at all. For example, if you're making a platforming kind of game, you can make it so that you're avoiding the traps and using the grappling hook, if that's your mechanic, to move from one platform to the other. But you're avoiding traps. You're climbing stuff. You're moving. It's a puzzle type of game, Or you can also describe, if you are making weapons, what kind of weapons that you're allowed to use. Is it, if you're having a tank type game, is it just a cannon? Do you have other kinds of weapons? Do you have grenades? What do you have? Any other items like pickups, abilities of the player, any other vehicles you can jump into. When I say script, you might want to give script examples, or this could also mean the script in terms of dialogue. Here you can remove this if it doesn't apply to you. Scoring, sometimes there won't be any actually physical scoring. Maybe you'll be challenged in terms of time, so it'll be a time-based game, right, as opposed to a scoring type of game. If you decide to put puzzles and mini games, you can add that in here. I don't recommend it. I don't think you have a lot of time for puzzles and mini games, like picking a lock, like we do in Fallout or something like that. That would be like an example of a mini game. any kind of bonuses or cheat codes. If any of these things don't apply to you, just remove the section. Don't leave it in here blank. I don't want to see blank sections in any of this stuff, right? Sound index, where did you get your sound from? Did you make your sound? Did you modify your sound from Open Game Art? Same thing with story index. I want you to put in here what's your story about, if it applies to you. If you have a story, a narrative for your game, you don't have to, right? In your art multimedia index, I want you to put in a little table with all examples of your art assets in there and where you got them from. Did you make them? Did you modify them? All that kind of stuff should be in there. Any other design notes. And when I look at future features, I don't look at them and go, what could I like? What could I do? Think about things that when you brainstorm with your team, you might think of a list of features that you can do. Remember we talked about scope? But maybe there's some things like, as an example, that you just can't do. An example of this is I'm currently making a game with some other students at UIT called, we're thinking about it called Mad Mechs, right? Where you have, mech to mech combat. Yeah, this is really, unique, of course, right? But I was thinking about calling it mechs versus kaiju, right? Because, almost like that whole Pacific Rim kind of idea, right? We have mechs and kaiju fighting each other. But my team came to me and said, Tom, I don't think we can do kaiju. Not for this, not for the minimum viable product. And I'm like, why not? Because kaiju are really hard to model. They're hard to model. Mechs, easier to model, right, in 3D. Kaiju, like creatures, monsters that are articulating and animating, they're like, I think that's out of scope, Tom. And I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. So we put that as a future feature. Maybe we'll make it as a future feature. You can play a kaiju instead of a mech, right? And then we thought, well, we can make mechs with different loadouts, right? Mechs with different loadouts, You can add a gun emplacement over here or some kind of force field on the left side. And then we're like, no loadouts, one mech, right? Why? Because we want to create a minimum viable product, right? We don't have time for all this extra stuff. Will it be a future feature? Yes, we put it down there in future feature. Something we can't do right now. Maybe we'll get to it at the end. If not, slot it in there. It's a good idea, right? Remember that the game you're going to be making this semester is not a AAA game, right? You're going to make a prototype, chances are. As polished as you can get it, of course, right? But it won't be the be-all and end-all. It'll be another portfolio piece for you to add to your portfolio if you're a gaming student. And if you're a software engineering student, it's again another example of, hey, I don't just do software engineering. My code is so good, I can even make games, right? So either way, there's nothing negative about creating a little portfolio piece for yourself. So that's what the game design document is all about. Keep in mind, this document is white. That's not going to work for me, guys. I don't want white. I want you to make this your own document. Color this, give it the same branding and colors that you have for your company. The company you're making, which is right here, whatever that company logo is. Make it your own. I want this document to look like your document, not my little template, right? It's a template. Make it your own game document, right? So think about those things. Those are all things due next week. Did everyone hand in their contract from last week? Some people are shaking their heads. Were you even here last week?
Yeah, I was not here.
Right? For people who are not here last week, there's a couple of people that weren't here last week, right? You need to find your stuff a team. So we're going to talk about grouping. Now, remember I talked about that contract being kind of a living document, right? Because there's people going to be leaving. I knew there's people going to be leaving the course. Some people dropped the course. People that never came, by the way, right? Some people joined the course, right, that weren't here last week. Some people didn't show up today. I don't know why, right? Who knows? Maybe they're not going to be part of the course. So you may need to adjust your contracts. Remember, I made team contracts last week to accommodate for people leaving, people joining, all that kind of stuff. Remember, the one thing that I'm not going to really allow you to do is make teams that are bigger for small projects. However, I will accept smaller teams for larger projects, right? Sorry, has to be that way. What do I mean by that, right? Well, if you remember, you're making 3 types of games, right? That we talked about last week. One is a platformer with up to 6 members, right? Why is it 6 members? This, physics. You can almost have somebody, one person, take care of physics on your own. You're doing physics from scratch or using some kind of physics engine like Box 2D, right? That takes a lot of effort just to do that. That's why there's 6 people here. And 2 software engineers, one for the game engine and one for the physics engine, right? 2D platformer, you need to have a really well-oiled team, everyone knowing what they're doing, all that kind of stuff. And even then, 6 members would be the most I would allow. Probably the least I would allow too. I don't think you should go less than 6. 5 would be a real challenge. I'll tell you right now. Like, you really need to know what to do. 4, undoable in the time we have, right? To do it well. Do it really crappy? Yeah, you can get a crappy job done with 4 people. Top-down side-scrolling space shooter, 3 people max. 2 people acceptable. I would accept 2 people, right? 3 people max. I won't allow you to go past 3 people. 3 people is already at the max as it is. It's almost too much, right? Top-down tank game, 4 members max. 3 people acceptable if you're all good, solid people. Solid citizens is what I like to say, right? If you're 3 solid citizens, you know how to code, you know good things about game, I would accept 3 members, right? But I recommend 4, right? It'd be hard for you to convince me to change the numbers up, only because it becomes too easy and it's not apples versus apples, okay? In terms of how you guys work out. So those are the things that you're working with. Remember that. So if they're new people, I'm going to stop recording in a second. Let's see if we can fix those teams. For people who haven't put up I'm going to call out the contracts. I'm going to stop this in a second, go back to eCentennial, put it up online, and then look at the contracts and see who's got their contract up and who didn't. Yes?
For the top-down shooter, would like 1 person work?
No. Because look what I'm asking for. Multiple bullet types, enemy movement patterns, right? Multi-stage boss, right? It's too much for 2 people. That would be hard, but you can probably get it done. 1 person, your product would be very poor, right? What was that?
So
not 1 person. I don't recommend 1 person for any of them. Okay, and I think it's best to have at least 2 people. 3 people is I recommend 3, and that way, because there's documentation involved, you have to take care of that. I'm not going to remove the requirements of the documentation, the presentations, all those kind of things. Someone's got to work your controls. Someone's got to play the game, test with you, all this kind of stuff. There's no way. At least 2 people for everything. Okay, so any questions around this stuff? Again, I'm just kind of reviewing for people who weren't here last week, right? All right. So this is this stuff. And again, like I said, if you look at this 5%, this is all due next week. I will put up an assignment Dropbox where you can, you know what's required. It'll include all this stuff, right, that I've just talked about, with a little bit more detail in terms of where the marks are going to land, right? But that's what's going to come up probably by the end of the day or early next week. But remember that I'm going to judge you. There's going to be a place where you can upload this stuff. Those 2 documents, again, the pitch presentation and the game design document, are going to be due by next week, Saturday at midnight. Okay? All right, that's it for me. Any other questions around your pitch presentation or your game design document?
We have to share our drive to you, right? What's your Gmail?
Share my drive? What do you mean?
No, our drive, because you said you want to take a look at the documents, right?
Yeah, you're going to put it up on a Dropbox. I'm gonna present an assignment,
Okay.
and you're going to put it up there. No, you're gonna submit it to me.
Okay.
When you submit your document, I'll see your document. Okay? Just like I did for your contract. Okay? All right, let's stop this recording right now. When we come back, I want to try and settle the other problems we have right now with the contracts and the teams, because there's some people that are new. And then when we come back, we'll get right into coding.